On this edition of the Correspondents, some world leaders calling President Trump's ban on travelers from majority Muslim countries divisive and wrong, but so have some U.S. State Department employees who've been told to get with the program or leave. The new U.S. Defense Secretary says the Trump administration is committed to strengthening relations with South Korea in the wake of worrisome provocations from North Korea. And Amnesty International takes on the Philippine president, calling his order to execute thousands of alleged drug dealers and users without a trial crimes against humanity. Hello and welcome to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Millar Sega in Washington. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump's 90-day entry ban on travelers from 7 majority Muslim countries has European governments scrambling to respond. The U.S. ban poses a major dilemma for some of these governments, some of whom are under intense pressure from both sides. VOA's Europe correspondent Luis Ramirez has our report.
A honeymoon interrupted. Theresa May had a successful visit with U.S. President Donald Trump and got him to say he supports NATO. But a firestorm awaited her after her Washington visit. May faces angry criticism from the left for not coming out strongly enough against Trump's ban.
My message as the Mayor of London is loud and clear. I think the ban is cruel and shameful, and our Prime Minister should not be condoning it.
Trump's action is prompting soul-searching among governments across Europe.
Welcoming refugees who flee war and oppression is part of our duty. We must ensure it happens in a fair, correct way and also in solidarity.
The Trump administration says its policy is similar to what President Obama did in 2011 when he banned visas for refugees from Iraq for 6 months. The 7 countries named in Trump's executive order are the same countries previously identified by the Obama administration as sources of terror.
And to explain the implications and the potential fallout from President Trump's immigration ban, I'm joined here in Washington by our senior diplomatic correspondent, Steve Herman, along with VOA White House correspondent, Cindy Saine. I thank you both for joining us. Steve, let me ask you the first question because It comes out of Luis Ramirez's report that, in fact, and something we've been hearing all week, that this directive by President Trump was actually an offshoot of President Obama's earlier policies. Is that accurate?
Not precisely. These countries were identified by the Obama administration as countries of concern, but the Trump administration has taken this to an entire new level with the blanket prohibition. So it's a different ballgame. So
we're talking about apples and oranges here, Cindy. Has President Obama weighed in yet on this?
He did. It was the first time. Of course, he's only been out of office for 10 days and went off on a vacation. Some spotted him perhaps in the Caribbean or something.
Looking very relaxed, yes.
That's right. But through a spokesperson, through a written statement, President Obama weighed in and said that he was very encouraged by all the people who were coming out protesting, and he thought that American values were at stake. And he said, as far as any comparisons to his administration, that freedom of religion is a basic fundamental right in the United States.
Do you expect the president will come out more publicly on this when he does come back?
Well, he had said in his final news conference that he was going to try and, be quiet for a while and not weigh in.
Which is what a lot of former presidents
But he said on subjects such as, and he named a couple, like he said for dreamers, for immigrants who came here and their parents, and for voting rights, for what he called core American values, that he would weigh in. Because his legacy is at stake. Now, Steve, there's also some question as to what to call this. Is this a Muslim ban?
I don't think that that's accurate, because the fact is that most Muslims in the world still can legally get visas for the United States. Although the administration's gone back and forth, it seems, on a day-to-day basis about whether to use the word ban or not.
So, but why stop refugees and immigrants from only these 7 countries and not some of the larger countries like Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, who were in fact involved in bringing terrorists to this country?
Right, well, that's what many people are questioning. And you'll notice that Saudi Arabia and other countries have been quite quiet in their reaction, countries that were not targeted, whereas the ones who are targeted are saying this is an insult to Islam. So, and some people are pointing to Trump's business ties in countries like Saudi Arabia, saying perhaps that's a reason for it. And there again, the Obama administration is saying, or the former Obama administration is saying, well, back then we just slowed down Iraqi refugees, and it was because of a concrete case of there being 2 Iraqis in Kentucky who had tried to perform a terror.
Steve, that's kind of the cynical view of this policy, is that the reason why some of these other countries were not named is because Trump actually has businesses in some of those countries. Has the Trump administration responded to that? At least that
they've
criticism?
denied that.
They've denied that simply. So tell me, because you're hearing a lot more about this than I am, what about the reaction from some of the world leaders in Europe? What are they saying about this immigration ban?
Well, I think there is quite a bit of concern in that now we have a case of a former Norwegian prime minister who was held up from getting through immigration because he had visited one of these countries on the list. So it's affecting a wide scope of people. And there are lawsuits being filed. Judges are issuing temporary restraining orders against some aspects of this. And it does look like that this is going to play out in the courts. But the fact has been, even before this new administration, that those officers at the border do have the ability to stop anybody, regardless of what their visa status, if they have suspicions about their intent in the United States.
Cindy, the GOP leadership has been fairly quiet on this issue. When this ban expires in 90 days, are they likely to extend this?
Well, I think so. I think there is broad support for what President Trump calls extreme vetting. And some have said we don't like the way it rolled out and the fact that green card holders were caught up in it. But most are not saying, and particularly the leaders, are not saying they're against the restrictions totally.
Well, Cindy, what do we know about extreme vetting versus what the president has done in the past? I mean, it's typically taking about 2 years to vet Syrian refugees, for example. What is the difference between that kind of vetting and Trump's supposed extreme vetting?
Well, a lot of refugees would say this has already been extreme, but I think the what's coming to it now, which is new, which is what I've been hearing, is that people are being questioned maybe about their views, their social media account, views that they've expressed. Do they love the United States? What are their feelings? So that's new.
So, Steve, you cover the State Department for us. This is a diplomatic channel we're talking to right here. What is the view from the State Department on this immigration ban?
Well, we have had about 1,000 Foreign Service officers and civil servants at the State Department and in the embassies around the world sign what's called a dissent channel memo against
Saying
this.
they don't like this policy.
Correct. Now, what is significant about this is there are several of these memos a year, and there may be a few signatures. We had the Syria memo last year in the Obama administration. There were 51 people signing that when that was considered a large number. So to have 1,000 signing on to this, that is unprecedented.
Does that make Rex Tillerson's job a little bit harder?
Perhaps, and he did.
I mean, he's a newbie here, right?
Correct.
He's
but he made reference to this in his opening statement at the State Department on Thursday when he spoke to the employees, and he acknowledged that this is legitimate, that there is this vehicle to dissent, but once they've dissented, they're supposed to get with the program and do their job. And that's also what Sean Spicer said from the White House lectern, although he did not put it in very diplomatic language.
Well, yeah. Let's hope these State Department folks are not worrying about their jobs. And Cindy, the other big story that I want to touch base with you before we run out of time is the diplomatic row that we've seen between Australia and the United States. There was a phone call apparently cut short by President Trump, and afterwards he said this has to be one of the worst calls ever. What can you tell us about that little diplomatic spat there?
Well, have been a fly on the wall there in the office. We don't know exactly, but we do know that it was a contentious call. And a lot of even some Republican lawmakers are saying this is so unnecessary with a close U.S. ally.
Yeah.
And we had Senator John McCain, Republican, and a couple of other lawmakers calling the Australian ambassador to the U.S. afterwards and just stressing how important the friendship is. So, I've heard reports out of Australia, don't know if it's true, saying that President Trump actually hung up. Now, Sean Spicer said that's not true. He didn't hang up, but it didn't.
Well, they're going to try to put a positive spin on this. But Steve, the president obviously said, hey, at a breakfast meeting, he said, don't even worry about this, I got this under control. But is this what we can expect to look forward to? Is this a new Trump diplomacy that we're looking at?
I think this is very much what was promised during the campaign, a inward-looking, somewhat confrontational view that the old way of doing things is out the window now, and these are transactional relationships for diplomacy. And a lot of people are very upset about that because, again, Australia is not just an ally. Australia is one of the Five Eyes, one of the countries that we share some of our deepest secrets with. And many people in the defense and intelligence community especially are upset to hear that the Australians are being treated
It's been less than 2 weeks, and it's been a very interesting run so far. We've got the rest of the year to go forward to.
Yes.
So thank you very much, Steve Herman, and thank you, Cindy Sain. We are going to take a short break right now, but when we come back, the new U.S. Defense Chief makes his first official visit overseas. We'll tell you where he went and why. This is The Correspondents on Voice of America.
This is Living Better.
A fitness class in California. The setting looks just like a beach, but the thick sand and equipment are indoors at SANDBOX Fitness in Los Angeles. Owner Katie SEIGEL says workouts on sand have advantages.
It's amazing for your joints and your muscles, so it's not having a lot of impact. It's little to no impact on your muscles and your joints when you're jumping, when you're running. It's used for injuries and physical therapy all the time, and at the same time, you burn 30 to 50% more calories.
SEIGEL also says that workouts on sand are intense, and participant Alex Hines agrees.
It's high intensity and low impact. So at the end of a really serious, intense workout, you're not aching anywhere. The only place where you are aching is your muscles.
Fitness experts say that running on sand expends about 1.5 times more energy than running on hard surfaces. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
VOA, telling America's story for more than 70 years.
This is a voice speaking from America and the war.
VOA exports America's most powerful product, freedom of speech.
Close the waters.
In parts of the world, information is scarce and oppression real. VOA, sharing a voice that says, we report the truth.
And welcome back to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Mil Arcega in Washington. Well, the first foreign trip by a high-profile U.S. cabinet secretary takes us to South Korea, where our new U.S. Defense Secretary, James Mattis, reiterated the Trump administration's commitment to strengthen relations with South Korea. This in the face of new provocations from North Korea. Now, at the start of his first overseas trip as Pentagon chief, Mattis was welcomed by South Korean Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-ahn. Mattis says the two plan to discuss the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, or THAAD, a system intended to counter North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile capabilities. But not everyone is in agreement. Beijing argues the system is likely to do more damage than good and says the deployment of the anti-missile system will hurt diplomatic relations. And joining me now to talk about what this means for U.S. policy in Asia, we are joined here in Washington by our Pentagon correspondent, Carla Babb, and our go-to guy on anything involving Asia, Steve Miller, host of VOA's Asia in a Minute. It's good to have both of you on the program. So, Carla, is this the new Asia pivot taking shape?
Well, I think the Pentagon would argue that the rebalance to Asia has not stopped as far as they're concerned. There's still 60% of our naval fleet is in the Pacific. The Army has more than 100,000 troops and civilians in the Pacific region. So until they hear from a Donald Trump to bring people back or to put more people in, they're continuing things as normal. So I think that what Secretary Mattis wanted to do is he wanted to reaffirm the commitment to South Korea to say, you know, hey, we're still here, we're not going anywhere, and you're a very important ally to us.
It sounds good, but why Asia and why now? I mean, General Mattis could have definitely gone to Afghanistan or Iraq or any of these trouble spots. Why Asia?
Well, I think it goes back to some of the comments that candidate Trump made during the campaign about South Korea and Japan not paying their fair share for U.S. troops deployed there. So this was seen as a very important high-profile visit for the United States to make because of the U.S. troop deployment in the Asia-Pacific region.
Well, that is a big deal, actually. The United States spends something like $5.5 billion to maintain a base in Japan. Japan only pays like a quarter of that, and South Korea pays like a lot less, maybe 1/5 of that. Is that going to be a sort of an issue? I mean, Trump did say that we need our allies to start paying more.
Well, if we follow a candidate, Trump, before he was elected, if we follow his rhetoric, then yes, that's going to be important. That was one of the things that was very controversial. He went to and pointed out to some of our strongest allies, like Steve said, Japan and Korea, also NATO, and said, you guys have to pay up if you want the U.S. to support defense for you. And I think with Secretary Mattis, his officials had told me that this was a listening for him. He was going to be a reassurer in chief that going in and say, you're very important to us. I mean, don't forget, there are still a little fewer than 30,000 U.S. troops in South Korea, a little fewer than 50,000 U.S. troops in Japan. So it's a very big presence there. And this region in general is just a very big military spending region. I think 6 out of the top 10 military spenders are right there in the Pacific. So the U.S. wants to be front and center, and that's why South Korea and Japan were first.
So what does South Korea and what does Japan want from the United States?
Well, I think they want reassurances that there's still unwavering commitment from Washington to abide by treaties, the bilateral treaties that are in effect. And that's what this trip is really geared to reassure both those in the respective heads of government and the defense ministries.
So, Carla, tell me how the U.S. plans to deal with the threat from North Korea.
Well, that threat continues to grow. There are several generals that say that the North Korean nuclear threat is the threat that keeps them up at night. The latest, we had a U.S. military official had spoken to us just a few weeks ago and had said that the North Korea systems now have the ability to mount a nuclear warhead on a missile and launch it. The problem comes when it tries to re-enter the atmosphere. They can't quite hit a target yet.
They're still trying to
work out the kinks. So, back in July, when I was traveling with then Secretary Ash Carter, the U.S. and the U.S. and South Korea announced that they were going to deploy THAAD, and that is still on track. That could be problematic in the future. Some of the presidential candidates in South Korea have not been as forward and as pro THAAD deployment as the interim president and the president who has recently been impeached. So we'll have to keep following that to see if THAAD will actually make it there before the elections.
So the THAAD system, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System that Carla's talking about, is actually seeing some opposition even among South Korean politicians.
Right, and this actually goes back before the agreement to deploy THAAD was in place, because China voiced a lot of opposition. They didn't want that military system with its far-reaching radar capabilities stationed so close, even though the United States and South Korea says it's purely for defensive measures against North Korean missiles.
It's an intercept system, essentially.
It is, and what has happened, the South Korean government alleges that China is exerting some forms of soft power by restricting cultural exports to China, restricting some imports from South Korea, and those within the opposition party and those within South Korea are worried that if South Korea moves further along with the deployment of THAAD, relations with China, which is responsible for a lot of trade, a lot of tourism, could be soured.
What is Pentagon Chief Mattis's view on China? Is China friend or foe?
China is a competitor, not an enemy. So I would not classify China as an enemy. But there are a lot of things that China does that the U.S. is concerned about. And that's why the U.S. has such a strong military presence in the Pacific. That is why the Trans-Pacific Partnership was pushed by the Obama administration, because they wanted to use the economic weight of the United States to also compete with China. Now that the U.S. has withdrawn from that, the military is even more important in the first days of this new administration to make sure that those ties hold.
So how has the view of the United States changed under this new president? Is it changing?
Well, I think it goes back to what Carla just said. Prior to President Trump assuming the oath of office and taking reins of the United States had a plan, a two-pronged approach, military and economic presence in the Asia-Pacific region. Withdrawing from the TPP has brought about a number of questions as to what America's role will be in the Asia Pacific region. And I think that's another reason why this trip is also very important, is to reassure that America is still committed to the region, perhaps in a different role or in a role that will be defined in the future.
Carla, has Mattis actually defined the U.S. role in that part of the world?
Oh, yes. He was just speaking with the South Korean defense minister, and he said that the U.S. will provide overwhelming response to any aggression against its allies. So that was definitely a strong statement made, and I think that South Korea and Japan heard that statement.
Okay, well, I appreciate you both keeping us informed on developments there. We know that General Mattis is going to be in Japan, so keep us posted on what happens next. Thank you so much, Carla and Steve. Time right now for another break, but when we come back, Amnesty International has some harsh words for the Philippine president and the conduct of his police officers. That's coming up next. But first, a reminder, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, and comments on our Facebook page. The address is VOA The Correspondents. We'll be right back.
This is BizBeat.
Another taxi service idea enters the market, this one coming from Sweden. It's a three-wheeled pod taxi that uses electric power, seating 2 people and the driver. Sven Wolf is the CEO of bzzt.
These vehicles are doing the best job on short trips, and that's also where we see the strength of what we offer.
Wolf sees worldwide potential for his idea and says the pod taxi complements city mobility with other types of transportation like biking, walking, buses, and subways. And like Uber, you hail the pod on your app, but it's environmentally friendly. Frida Longnell is a student who likes the convenience of the bright yellow pod taxi.
It's cheap and it's easy to get by in the city of Gothenburg in a quick way.
The pods go 75 kilometers on a single charge. The company plans a 20-pod trial service in Stockholm this year. From VOA's BizBeat, I'm Philip Alexio.
And welcome back to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Millar Sega in Washington. Well, we move now from South Korea to the Philippines. Amnesty International, the world's largest human rights organization, is accusing the Philippine government of crimes against humanity following a wave of executions there that have killed thousands of alleged drug offenders. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, who ordered the killing, says drugs are a national security threat. But as VOA's Henry Ridgewell reports, Duterte has ordered all police anti-drug units to be disbanded in the wake of the brutal killing of a South Korean man.
The scale of Amnesty's accusations is shocking. The group claims up to 7,000 people have been killed in the last 7 months since President Rodrigo Duterte took office.
The government at the highest levels have ordered the police and police working in concert with armed hitmen who are essentially acting as hit squads and executing people.
Amnesty says the police often act with no evidence and target the poorest sections of Philippine society.
What we found is police are being paid for individual hits. They're working in cahoots with the actual funeral homes, where they're being paid on each body that they deliver to the funeral homes.
Annalyn, not her real name, lost her husband and 4 friends in a police raid on her house last year. She says they were unarmed and none of them were involved in drugs. If you are poor, she says, the police can do what they like.
Why is it that the rich are jailed and used as witnesses, but the poor, why do they kill the poor?
And joining me once again right here in Studio 52, the host of VOA's Asia in a Minute, our very own Steve Miller. I thank you for sticking around, Steve, and doing
pleasure.
Double duty. Now, these are very disturbing allegations, more than 7,000 extrajudicial killings. How did we get there?
Well, I think you have to look at the campaign that Rodrigo Duterte ran as a candidate for the office of the president. He ran on a very populist campaign, trying to rout out corruption, rout out crime, as you said. It's being termed as a national security threat, the drug problem in the Philippines. And when he took office on June 30th of 2015, he implemented this program. And to date, roughly a third of these 7,000 killings have been carried out by police forces and the rest by other members of the population.
Wow. So has Duterte, surely there has to be other more pressing matters for the Philippines. How is Duterte responding to some of the pushback from around the world and from Amnesty International.
Well, he's consistently pushed back, saying that this is our country, it's a sovereign matter, and this is the way we need to do things. And when you speak to Filipinos about this issue, it rates very highly about their concerns about the corruption, about the crime, about the drugs. Last year, I spoke with a number of Filipinos who had various views. They all recognized the problem, but they also repeatedly said, you don't know how bad it is unless you live here, and we don't know what else to do.
But there have been large protests in Manila and in other
and
cities,
elsewhere, yeah.
right? Regarding this issue, is there a strong opposition to this, at least within some of the political parties in Manila, in the Philippines?
Well, I mean, there is some political opposition, most notably Senator De Lima. She has been a very staunch critic of President Duterte, who happens also, Senator De Lima is also under investigation for alleged drug crime by the Judicial Department. But she's been a very staunch critic of Duterte, and she came out and said that she believes that the Philippine National Police Force is one of the most corrupt organizations in the country itself.
And it seems Duterte may be coming around to that. He wants an investigation of corruption within the police department following the killing of that South Korean man. What happened there? Can you...
Well, okay, so the South Korean businessman, his name was Ji Ju. He was taken from his home along with his housekeeper, held in a police detention facility, and ultimately strangled. The police officers involved tried to extort 8 million Philippine pesos from his wife, which is about 160,000 US dollars. She paid that money. And then they tried to extort another 5 million Philippine pesos, which is about $100,000. But she didn't pay that because they couldn't offer any proof of life. When all this came to life, there were several Philippine national police officers involved with the crime. That led to the Philippine president apologizing, as well as his chief of police apologizing to the widow about what happened, and ultimately leading to the disbandment of the police forces.
This looks bad because it directly points to this economic incentive that's been placed there. Police officers are actually making money from killing these suspects.
Right, and during last year, President Duterte joked. He said, if you bring in a dead drug dealer, I'll pay you 5 million pesos, $160,000. But if you bring in one that's alive, I'll pay you 4.999 million pesos.
A little bit less.
A little bit less. But we see that routinely with some of his statements about killings. Whether or not he drove around Davao with a shotgun looking for people to kill. So he'll say something and then roll it back as a joke.
He has admitted to killing drug suspects himself.
He has, but he's also rolled back the statements as well. So his role.
It's not exactly something you want on your resume.
Exactly.
So what happens next to these extrajudicial killings? Does that stop now? What happens?
Well, hopefully it stops. That's what rights groups like Amnesty International want to see. What has happened right now in the wave of this last issue with the South Korean businessman is that he's disbanding the anti-drug task force within the police department and has assigned those duties to the National Anti-Narcotics Agency. However, he's also issued a new executive order allowing the military to assist in those investigations, and has vowed to kill more drug dealers as well.
This battle continues. I'm curious though, when a group like Amnesty International accuses a government or a leader of crimes against humanity, is that a charge that carries any weight?
I think it carries a lot of perception around the international community. I mean, from day one, there's been a lot of criticism of Rodrigo Duterte as president and these policies. Not only Amnesty International, but also Human Rights Watch and other groups have come out very strongly against these policies.
Okay, well, Steve, keep us posted on developments there in the Philippines. I thank you very much for sticking around for 2 segments. That's all the time we have, though. I thank you for watching. I hope you join us again next week for another edition of The Correspondents. Meantime, stay up to date with the latest news from around the world at voanews.com. You can also catch this in our other programs there. Just click on the Watch tab and pick your program. We're also on Facebook and YouTube at VOA The Correspondents. I'm SEIGEL, and for now, so long from Washington.